A female veteran walked into court wearing her Medal of Honor. By the time the judge ordered her to take it off, the entire country was watching. Nobody in that courtroom was expecting a war hero to get dressed down by a judge, least of all Danielle Reeves. It was a hot Thursday morning in Salinas, California, and the county courthouse was already packed. People fanned themselves with papers, checking their phones, waiting for the next case. Danielle stood quietly at the back, waiting for her turn to testify on behalf of Leo Bramson, a former Army buddy fighting a property dispute. She wasn't there for herself, just to speak to Leo's character. She didn't say much when she entered, but people noticed her. The crisp blue blazer, the slacks, the calm expression. And above her left breast pocket, the Medal of Honor. Not flashy, just there. At 46, Danielle had seen more in her life than most people ever would. She didn't wear the medal often, but Leo insisted she wear it today. He said the judge would take her more seriously that way. Turns out, that was a mistake. Judge Malcolm Greer looked up as Danielle walked to the front. The bailiff had just called her to the stand. Greer was a tall man in his early 60s, slicked back gray hair, rimless glasses perched on the end of his nose. He had a habit of peering over them like every question was a test. "Miss Reeves," he said, not even looking at the papers in front of him, "is there a reason you chose to wear that?" She blinked. "Excuse me, Your Honor?" "That," he repeated, waving a finger vaguely at her chest. "The medal. This is a court of law, not a ceremony." Murmurs swelled through the gallery. A few people looked up from their phones. Danielle stayed still. "It's the Medal of Honor, sir. I wore it because I was asked to speak on behalf of another soldier. I thought it might show credibility." The judge squinted. "Well, in this courtroom, we don't need symbols to show credibility. We need facts. And frankly, that's performative." Someone in the back whispered, "What the hell?" But Greer wasn't done. "Either remove it, or I will excuse you from the stand." Danielle looked at him for a long second. Her hands stayed at her sides. She didn't reach for the medal. "I'm not here to make a statement," she said softly. "I'm here to tell the truth." The judge leaned forward. "You have 10 seconds, Ms. Reeves." Gasps again. A few people started recording. Others stared at Greer, their expressions a mix of confusion and anger. Danielle finally sighed and unpinned the medal. She didn't slam it down. She didn't cause a scene. She simply handed it to her attorney, sat down, and gave her testimony. Measured, honest, respectful. But the air in the room had shifted. Even Leo's lawyer, Jordan Hall, a tough litigator from Santa Cruz, paused before continuing. Her voice shook when she said, "For the record, Your Honor, Ms. Reeves is a decorated veteran who wore the Medal of Honor to reflect her service, not to disrupt your courtroom." Greer didn't even respond. He just told her to proceed. And somehow, they did. The testimony finished, the session ended, people filtered out. But no one forgot what happened. Outside the courthouse, a woman named Alyssa Trent, an independent journalist with a modest YouTube following, pulled Danielle aside. "I caught that on video," she said. "You okay?" Danielle shrugged. "He had a problem with the medal, not with me. That says more about him than me." Alyssa nodded slowly, but her face said she didn't agree. She uploaded the clip later that afternoon, and everything changed. But what happened after court shook more than just the people in that room. Danielle never asked to be called a hero. She was 23 when she joined the Army straight out of Modesto, a town that smelled like almonds and diesel fuel. Her father had been a truck mechanic. Her mother worked night shifts at the hospital. Danielle wasn't running from anything. She just didn't want to wait tables for the rest of her life. The Army offered purpose, structure, and a paycheck. That was enough. By 29, she was a master sergeant. She had been deployed twice, spent months living out of tents, carrying wounded men through sandstorms, eating MREs under the drone of far-off gunfire. The day that changed everything was in Fallujah. A convoy got ambushed outside a fuel station. 2 Humvees took fire, and 1 went up in flames. Danielle was in the 3rd truck. She could have waited for backup, but she didn't. She yanked the door open and ran straight into the smoke. She dragged 1 man out by his vest, then another, then 2 more. She went back a 4th time and pulled out a corporal with half his body burned. A 5th time, and she carried her platoon leader, unconscious, bleeding from his head. The 6th trip, her uniform caught fire. She barely made it back out. They told her later she had third-degree burns on her side, a concussion, and a fractured arm. She didn't remember most of it. All she recalled was the heat and the screaming. 6 men lived because of her. 3 of them still called her every Veterans Day. One named his daughter Danny. A year later, at a quiet ceremony in San Diego, they handed her the Medal of Honor. She didn't smile much, didn't even invite her parents. They said they'd rather not make a big deal. After that, she turned down interviews, declined parades. She spent the last few years before retirement training younger soldiers, handling logistics and keeping to herself. Even out of uniform, she stayed low profile. She got a small house outside of Gilroy, grew tomatoes in her backyard, and mentored young women in ROTC programs. She didn't wear the medal often, maybe once a year, sometimes never. But Leo Bramson had been there in Fallujah. He was the one she'd pulled out second. When his property dispute landed him in court, accused of violating zoning laws on his own land, he'd called her. He sounded embarrassed, said he didn't have anyone else who could speak to his integrity. Danielle didn't hesitate. "Tell me where and when," she said. The morning of the hearing, she took the medal out of the drawer in her bedroom, stared at it a moment, polished it with a soft cloth. She clipped it to her blazer, not to show off, but to honor the person she was when Leo needed her the first time. She never expected it would be treated like a threat. That moment in the courtroom, that sudden shame, cut deeper than she thought it would. Not because Greer insulted her, but because he made it feel like everything she'd done was somehow too much. Her service, her pain, her medal, it didn't belong in his space. That's what he told her without saying it outright. And yet, Danielle hadn't yelled, hadn't made a scene, because old habits die hard. Respect the rules, follow the chain of command, don't let them see you bleed. But after court, when she sat alone in her truck in the parking lot, the silence was deafening. She looked down at the medal sitting in her lap and wondered, for the first time, if the thing meant anything at all to the people she'd sworn to protect. But that one gesture, the medal, was about to make her a lightning rod. Danielle didn't have time to process everything that day, but Alyssa Trent did. The journalist who recorded the video had seen her share of tense courtroom moments, but this was different. That judge didn't just dismiss a veteran. He seemed almost irritated that someone like Danielle even existed. That night, Alyssa went digging. She started looking into Judge Malcolm Greer's record. It didn't take long for patterns to show up. Over the last 7 years, Greer had presided over dozens of civil and criminal cases involving veterans. And the outcomes? Strangely harsh. Charges rarely dropped. Fines maxed out. Even when there were clear signs of PTSD, he seemed to ignore expert recommendations. In one case, a Marine with documented combat trauma got jail time for what others usually resolved with community service. Alyssa didn't stop there. She tracked down Allison Reyes, a public defender who had argued in Greer's courtroom multiple times. Reluctantly, Allison agreed to speak, off the record. "He doesn't like anything that challenges his authority," she said, "especially veterans. It's like he resents the respect they get. I've had him snap at men with service dogs. One time, he told a woman to stop using her deployment as an excuse for being difficult." Alyssa's jaw clenched. "Did anyone ever file a complaint?" "Oh, plenty," Allison said, "but complaints disappear when judges have friends in the right places." Alyssa jotted it all down, quietly furious. Back in court the next day, Greer showed no sign of regret. If anything, he seemed smug, like he expected the whole thing to blow over. He even made a comment during another hearing that afternoon about people turning courtrooms into parades. Subtle jab. Not subtle enough. But what Greer didn't know was that someone in his own office was watching closely. Megan Dantzler, a court clerk who'd worked under Greer for 5 years, saw what happened with Danielle and felt something snap. She had kept her head down for a long time, long enough to witness how Greer treated certain defendants, particularly women with military backgrounds. She'd once overheard him mutter, "If they're tough enough for war, they're tough enough for jail." That line haunted her. That night, Megan wrote a long, detailed email. She didn't send it to HR. She sent it to a contact she knew at the California Commission on Judicial Performance. She also included dates, case numbers, and a summary of internal complaints that mysteriously went nowhere. She hit send at 11:03 p.m. Elsewhere, the clip Alyssa posted of Danielle's moment in court was gaining traction. It had started with a few hundred views. By the time Megan hit send, It had over 200,000. Veterans groups began sharing it, some quietly, some with rage. A Facebook post from a retired Air Force colonel read, "She didn't ask for applause. She showed up to speak the truth and got silenced." On Twitter, the outrage snowballed. Hashtag respect. The medal. Greer must go. And through it all, Danielle stayed quiet. She wasn't on social media. She didn't give interviews. She wasn't trying to be anyone's cause. But people were watching, listening, talking. And Greer, who had ruled for decades without pushback, didn't realize just how many eyes were now on him. But someone in that courtroom wasn't going to let it slide this time. The clip was only 46 seconds long, but by Friday morning, it had hit over 1 million views. Danielle Reeves, standing calmly in court, being told to remove her Medal of Honor. The judge's voice, sharp, dismissive. The camera shaking slightly as Alyssa filmed from the back row, catching the stunned expressions around the courtroom. It was raw, it was real, and it cut deep. Alyssa had titled it simply, "Judge Forces Decorated Veteran to Remove Medal in Courtroom." She didn't add music or commentary. She didn't need to. Comments poured in like floodwater. Veterans, active duty soldiers, military families, and even civilians who barely knew what the medal meant. They all had something to say. "This is beyond disrespect. My brother died in combat. That medal is sacred. Who does this judge think he is? Give her the bench and take his seat." Danielle had no idea. She was at home in Gilroy, repairing the latch on her backyard gate, when her neighbor Patty came walking over with her phone out. "You're on the internet," Patty said, half whispering, half grinning. Danielle wiped her hands on a rag. "What?" Patty held up the phone. "Someone filmed the court thing. You're everywhere." Danielle watched the clip. She winced at the sound of the judge's voice, at the way she looked standing there trying to hold her ground without making a scene. She didn't even finish the video, just handed the phone back. "People are pissed," Patty added, "in a good way, like defending you." Danielle didn't answer. She just stared at the ground for a second, brow furrowed, then said, "I need to go feed the dogs." But there was no escaping it. By noon, her voicemail was full. Veterans organizations were reaching out. Podcasts, news anchors, talk shows. Even 2 senators' offices had tried contacting her through local reps. One message from a group in Tempe, Arizona, said they were organizing a rally. Meanwhile, Greer, he was doubling down. In a brief televised interview outside the courthouse that same afternoon, he stood flanked by 2 court officers and said, "Courtrooms are sacred spaces. We don't allow political or emotional displays. This isn't about disrespecting veterans. It's about preserving order." A reporter shouted, "But she earned the Medal of Honor." Greer didn't flinch. And that's commendable. But commendation does not override courtroom protocol. Those words, "commendation does not override protocol," spread like fire. Clips from his statement got stitched into veteran reaction videos. TikToks showed service members in uniform watching the original courtroom footage, shaking their heads, then saluting the screen. Even non-military creators started jumping in. A former public school teacher posted, "She wasn't trying to disrupt anything. She sat down and gave calm testimony. So why was she punished?" A Navy vet named Gavin Lawton, who had nearly 1 million followers, recorded a shaky selfie video from his porch in Boise, Idaho. "This woman ran into a fire to pull men out of a convoy. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. You don't treat someone like that. You don't humiliate a soldier for doing the right thing." Danielle's name was now headline material. But the sudden spotlight wasn't just overwhelming. It came with a cost. She started getting letters in her mailbox. Some were kind, others weren't. One envelope had no return address. Inside was a single note, typed in blocky black font. "Stop acting like you're better than the rest of us." That one hit different. Not because it scared her, but because it reminded her of something she heard once on base from a superior officer who didn't like women leading squads. Still, she didn't say anything. She didn't post a response, didn't make a statement. She just waited. The next knock on her door came from a familiar face, Leo Bramson. "You okay?" he asked, eyes full of guilt. "I didn't mean for this to get so big." Danielle waved him in. "You didn't do anything wrong, Leo." He looked at her, hesitant. "They want you to talk. You gonna?" She looked down at the medal again, resting on her table. She still hadn't put it back in the case. "I'm thinking about it." But the pressure wasn't just online, it came knocking at Danielle's door. Over the weekend, the pressure snowballed. What started as a clip had turned into a national story. Morning shows brought in military analysts. Legal experts debated courtroom decorum. The internet did what it always does, amplified the noise, sharpened the edges, and threw everyone into a corner. Judge Greer wasn't silent anymore. He appeared on West Coast Morning Live, seated stiffly next to a spokesperson from the county court system. His tone? Defensive, cold. "I don't care what medal someone wears," he said. "Courtroom procedure applies to all citizens. The moment we start carving out exceptions based on emotion, we erode the foundation of justice." That line set social media on fire. Again, news outlets dug up old footage, Greer berating a mother for bringing her toddler into a family hearing. Another clip of him scolding a retired firefighter for wearing a memorial ribbon on his blazer. Consistent, some said. Cruel, others argued. But it wasn't until Danielle started getting questioned for her silence that things got even messier. A former Marine turned podcaster named Colby Rask, with a loyal audience, went live on Sunday night and said, "Where is she? Why isn't she speaking up? Is she scared or does she not care? You don't just go viral and disappear when people are rallying behind you." That one stung. Not because Danielle cared about fame, but because people started messaging her directly, asking if she was letting them down. It felt like getting ordered back into the field when you'd just taken off your gear. That night, she sat on her back porch with Leo and a friend from her old unit, Rhonda Pritchard, now a sheriff's deputy in Bakersfield. Rhonda took a sip of her soda and said, "They're not wrong, Dee. You didn't ask for any of this. But now that you're in it, you got to decide what you're going to do." Danielle didn't answer right away. She stared out at the trees. The sky was clear, but her mind felt anything but. Leo finally said, "You saved my life twice, once in Iraq and again when you agreed to stand up for me. But now it's not just about me. It's about every vet who's ever been dismissed or disrespected." That hit her harder than anything else. The next morning, Danielle finally agreed to an interview with Alyssa Trent in her own home. No stage, no lights, just 2 chairs at the kitchen table. Alyssa kept it simple. Just a phone camera, 2 mics, and 1 question. "Why did you stay quiet?" Danielle folded her hands. "Because I thought maybe it'd go away, that people would stop talking, that it would just fade." "But it didn't," Alyssa said. "No," Danielle agreed, "and maybe it shouldn't. Maybe what happened in that courtroom wasn't just about me. Maybe it's about how we treat people when the uniform's off, when the noise is gone, when all they have left is a medal and a memory." A pause. "Do you think the judge should be removed?" Danielle didn't blink. "I think he forgot what service looks like." The interview went live that afternoon. It hit 2 million views in 24 hours. Within a day, the California Judicial Review Board issued a formal statement. An investigation into Judge Malcolm Greer's conduct is now underway. The courthouse was suddenly swarming with press. And for the first time in over 20 years on the bench, Judge Greer wasn't in control of the room anymore. But once she spoke, it sparked something no one saw coming. The hearing wasn't held in the same courtroom Danielle had testified in. This one was larger, inside the California State Building in Sacramento, built to hold formal judicial reviews, marble floors, high ceilings. Every footstep echoed like a warning. Danielle didn't want to be there, but she showed up. She wore the same blue blazer, but this time, the Medal of Honor was back on. Not for attention, not for a protest, just because it belonged there. She earned it. No one was going to shame her out of that again. The panel of 5 review board members sat facing her, stoic. All of them had legal backgrounds. 3 were judges themselves. Judge Greer sat at the other table, alone except for his lawyer. He looked smaller now, less sure of himself. The room wasn't his anymore, and when Danielle entered, he didn't look up. A hushed murmur moved through the crowd. Not a sound of judgment, just recognition. Dozens of veterans filled the public seating, uniforms, patches, ribbons, some in wheelchairs, some in suits. Many had never met Danielle in their lives, but they came anyway. Danielle took the stand. This time, there was no bailiff threatening her, no gavel snapping at her heels, just questions, and her answers. "What were you thinking when the judge asked you to remove the medal?" "I was thinking about the men I pulled out of a burning truck in Fallujah. and how that medal wasn't mine alone. It belongs to every soldier who didn't come home. And when you removed it? I felt like I'd been told that part of my life didn't matter. Greer's attorney objected, said the judge was just maintaining courtroom neutrality. But one board member, Teresa Kwan, a former JAG officer, leaned forward. Courtroom neutrality doesn't mean erasing someone's identity, she said, especially when that identity is bound to service and sacrifice. Danielle stayed calm. She wasn't out for revenge. She just wanted the truth to sit in that room, for once, without being silenced. Then came the witnesses. Megan Dantzler, the court clerk, read from her notes. She spoke clearly, firmly. She recounted Greer's past remarks, his dismissive comments, the way he sneered at veteran defendants, at women who mentioned service-related trauma. A former Marine named Alan Price testified next. He had stood in Greer's courtroom 3 years ago for a minor drug offense related to his PTSD. The judge told him, "Military service doesn't excuse weak choices." Alan never forgot it. And today, he showed up to say it out loud. By midday, the tension had shifted. It wasn't about just one courtroom moment anymore. It was about a pattern, a mindset, a failure of leadership. When the board broke for recess, no one left the building. Outside, reporters lined the steps. Inside, people huddled in corners, talking in low voices. A legal intern said, "I've never seen anything like this." Greer's closing statement was brief, cold. "I did what I believed was appropriate to maintain courtroom integrity," he said. "I regret that some perceived it otherwise." He didn't apologize. Danielle didn't speak again. She didn't need to. The board deliberated for 3 hours, then returned with their recommendation: immediate removal from the bench, pending final approval by the state Supreme Court. The room didn't erupt. There were no cheers, just silence. Some tears, quiet nods between strangers. Danielle stood, picked up her medal, and walked out, flanked by veterans, none of whom she had asked to come, but all of whom showed up anyway. She never looked back at Greer, but the last word wouldn't come from Danielle or the judge. Greer's removal was finalized just 6 days later. The state Supreme Court signed off with little debate. The public pressure had been unrelenting. News stations ran headlines like "Judge removed after Medal of Honor incident, Veterans testimony sparks judicial reckoning." Greer never gave another interview. His name faded from the headlines quicker than Danielle's, and that was fine with her. She didn't celebrate. No champagne, no victory lap. She just went home to Gilroy and walked her dogs. But something had shifted. The next week, she got a letter from a 12-year-old girl named Sophia in Santa Rosa, whose mom had served in the Navy. It was handwritten in pencil, full of spelling mistakes. At the bottom, Sophia wrote, "I want to be like you. I didn't know girls could get that medal." Danielle kept that letter. More started coming. Emails, messages from people she didn't know, veterans, teachers, parents, judges even. Most just said thank you. Then came the unexpected part, an invitation. The California Bar Association wanted her to speak at their annual conference. She hesitated. Public speaking wasn't her thing. But Rhonda Pritchard called her and said, "You have to do it. You're not just a soldier anymore. You're a symbol." Danielle rolled her eyes. "I hate that word." "I know," Rhonda laughed. "But this time you get to define it." She said yes. She took the stage in a plain blazer, no medal, no fanfare. The room was packed with attorneys, clerks, and law students. "I'm not a lawyer," Danielle began. "I don't know the statutes or the codes or how many motions it takes to win a case, but I know what it's like to walk into a room and be told you don't belong. I know what it's like to be seen as a problem just for existing." The room stayed silent. "I wore the medal that day because I thought it would help someone I care about. But what happened showed me something deeper. How far we still have to go in how we see veterans, especially women, especially those who don't look or act like the stereotype." She ended with one sentence that would be quoted for weeks. Respect shouldn't have to be earned twice. After her speech, things started changing. A group of state legislators proposed a new bill, the Reeves Act. It would require mandatory training for all judges on how to handle cases involving veterans, specifically on service-related trauma, discrimination, and respectful conduct. Danielle didn't write the bill, didn't even lobby for it, but she gave it her blessing when they asked, and quietly, behind the scenes, She helped launch a legal aid fund for female veterans navigating the court system. It was Rhonda's idea. Danielle just offered the name, Stand and Speak. She never wanted to be the center of any movement, but when people asked her how it felt to have changed things, she gave the same answer every time. I didn't change anything. I just refused to sit down. Her life didn't suddenly become glamorous. She still lived in the same house, still grew tomatoes, still took long walks with her dogs every morning. But now, every once in a while, a letter would show up from someone in a small town or on a base halfway across the country. And the message was always some version of, "You made me feel seen." Danielle kept those letters too, because in the end, this wasn't about medals or judges or even viral clips. It was about dignity, about showing up, about knowing that when you've earned your voice, no one has the right to take it from you. Speak up when something's wrong, even if your voice shakes, even if no one else stands with you. You might just be the one they were waiting for.